Welcome back to Benchmark. On our last show for 2011, as is customary here on Benchmark, we look back at the nation's pioneering thinkers and leaders who have made it to our studio. We have excerpts of 8 conversations from this year's lineup. Up first is Lalit Veeratunga, Secretary to the President, who talks about the concern shown by the West over Sri Lanka's relationship with China.
The resistance of the West is to be expected, no doubt about it. You see, they are also fearful of China, because China is emerging so fast as a nation that can stand on its own. Some of the investments in these Western countries have come from China. If China withdraws, their economies will collapse and crumble. So they have a reason to worry about China's ascendancy, probably as the world's most influential economic power. I believe that's the way they are going. China has been a long-standing friend. We still have our only memorial, which I think would be can be a world-class convention center. The BMICH was a gift from China. What should the Sri Lanka's leadership be doing? Sri Lanka's leadership should be looking at our friends in the world and not be aligned to one section. Okay, say that we are aligned to the West. What would the West do? West would want us to do this and that, and they're not going to give the kind of aid that China has given. They're not going to give us a harbor. They're not going to give us an airport. They're not going to give us a performing arts theater. They have not. The history is that. So China's relationship with Sri Lanka is unique.
Next, he speaks about the question of sports tourism in Sri Lanka.
If you take in the order of importance or hierarchy, if you give 10 to beating the LTT, defeating terrorism, sports tourism is at 2 or 3, very doable. And we did it. He said that, His Excellency the President said that in his 2010 budget for 2011, immediately you see Surya Vava. Now if you listen to the commentators, Ian Botham and Ramesh Raja, and these are very well accepted commentators, they don't need to be palavering the Sri Lankans. Ian Botham said, this is a fantastic place. If I am allowed to come here and design a golf course, I will do that. I hope they will have a golf course. That is what he said. Ramesh Raja says, you know, in this jungle, and he shows this elephant who was hovering around. He says, in this jungle, you have created this first-class stadium, which is not second to anywhere else in the world. So we have immediately done it. Now, bidding for 2018 is a very important thing, because we will have to gear ourselves, which means we'll develop the roads, we'll develop the hotels, there will be employment for the people, there will be many other investors coming in. The moment you are a venue, a global venue, there's so much of attention. So sports tourism is certainly going to thrive in Sri Lanka. Now this Formula One, it's a doable thing, and it will be done. As you know, the Colombo South Harbour is being built. All that area, 450 hectares, will be reclaimed. Sri Lanka's map will change. Who on earth thought that these things will be done? So there are people who would say, oh, this is, people must be given food before you do all that. These are concurrent things. If you think people's food is important, number one, I am fully for it. But you cannot forget others as well, because you have to sustain this economy. And that is what the government is doing.
British High Commissioner John Rankin spoke to us in early April this year when he touched on the subject of bilateral relations between Sri Lanka and Britain.
The overall relationship remains strong. We've got strong historic links, our shared history, our shared links in the Commonwealth of Nations. We've got strong trade and investment links, we've got strong education links, we've got strong cultural links. But we've also had our challenges. And it's no secret that we've had our differences in some recent months. My job as a diplomat, though, is to put those differences behind us, find the areas where we can make common progress and common cause, and I'm sure I'll find them in taking my work forward here.
He next talks to us about the relationship that existed between his country and Gaddafi's Libya.
We brought Colonel Gaddafi and his country in from the fold, from having been a country which was supporting and funding terrorism worldwide, and of course the Lockerbie incident is still one which is very raw for the people of my country as well as for the people of the United States. But Colonel Gaddafi has failed to move forward. Colonel Gaddafi has, rather than making the choice of further giving his people a say in the governance of that country, has chosen to seek to brutalise and murder them. And having made that choice, my government is determined not to allow the civilians in that country to be massacred. We're working together not just with other Western countries, but of course with the Gulf countries as well, with Qatar and the UAE, for example, joining the coalition dealing with the issues.
The head of UK Trade and Investment, Janet Ford, tackled the sovereign debt crisis in Europe when she appeared on our show during the first week of May.
Well, the obvious answer is that this is a huge benefit to us not being part of the Eurozone. That we can manage our economy pretty much ourselves, which we have done, and so we are not affected. We are supporting the bailout for Ireland and for Portugal and for Greece, but obviously in a way that is affordable for us. And so we are not affected to any great extent by those crises.
Her next comment is on British tourists and how we could entice more of them into our country.
In terms of enticing our countrymen, as you say, we are a major source country. We are the largest Western country, number of tourists that come here. And in terms of what we spend here, you know, we are second largest to India, only because there are more of them. But we certainly spend our money when we get here. And also I think tourists from UK are more interested than any other group of tourists in exploring the real Sri Lanka beyond the beach resort. I mean, we go to the Cultural Triangle, we go to other places of interest, and we like the cultural uniqueness that Sri Lanka has to offer. And that is what, as educated and intelligent tourists, you would want. You know, you would want people to look beyond the obvious attractions, and there are many. Another area I think that the UK has found helpful, not only to establish the brand UK, we know what UK is, it's House of Parliament, it's changing the guard, it's tradition, but in UK we invested heavily in training and in hospitality and professionalising that area. It's traditionally been a low-paid, low-skilled area, and yet with tourists becoming more demanding of services, I think it will pay to upgrade the services offer. So if I was sitting in Sri Lanka wanting to offer more, I would look at my staff and how can I help my staff deliver the best service that they can. As I say, it's about professionalising things that have traditionally been seen as lower skilled jobs, because they're very important jobs, because everyone working in the tourism industry is an ambassador for Sri Lanka.
Time now for a commercial break. When we return, we have more from our Best of Bench interviews. Thank you for staying with Benchmark. We now continue with our Best of Bench interviews. Here's Krishan Balendra, Chairman of the Colombo Stock Exchange, on how challenging it will be for the bourse.
The Colombo Stock Exchange in the early 90s was seen as one of the most advanced in the region. I believe that we were the first exchange in South Asia to introduce fully automated scriptless trading. Since then, partly because volumes have been so lackluster, because of the conflict, the economy didn't progress, and volumes were low. So the exchange hasn't kept pace with some of the developments and advancements we've seen in other exchanges. But now obviously the environment has changed. Things are looking up. The private sector is growing fast and looking at new investments. We are seeing a number of new IPOs. So in this environment, we have to now develop the exchange further, enhance our technology, bring in certain investor protection measures which are on par with international standards. So it's an exciting time, but a challenging one as well.
Here is his comment on the IPO frenzy that took over our market.
The IPOs, as you said, is a positive development for the capital markets. It's something the Colombo Stock Exchange would encourage. Our market is very limited in size, although it has grown significantly in the last 2 years. Volumes as well is still small compared to the regional, more developed bourses. So IPOs are positive. Some of the IPOs recently have not traded up like they have in the last 2 years. But again, that's in keeping in line with the performance of the market. The market went up 100% for 2 years. In that market conditions, the IPOs did extremely well. But today the market is not performing as strongly. So naturally you don't see IPOs on listing trading up as they did in 2009 and 10. So again, we are not too concerned about it, and overall we would encourage more companies to list, and this IPO frenzy, as you call it, we think is a positive development.
Former senior diplomat and UN Under Secretary General for Disarmament Affairs Jayantha Dhanapala spoke to us in July about the lack of effectiveness of the opposition and where the country was headed at that time.
Well, I think it's fairly clear that the Rajapaksa administration is well established, and since the president got his mandate last year, both in the presidential election and in parliament, he's well established to continue until the end of his term. But what is interesting in this election is the sharp decline in the votes of the opposition, which Rosie Senanayake herself has eloquently pointed out, and also the fact that the TNA have swept the board in the north and the east. Now I think thereby hangs a tale, and unless the government takes cognizance of that trend, in spite of the malpractices and the numerous other irregularities that are alleged to have taken place in the north, we will have a very serious democracy deficit with regard to the governance of our minorities, because we know that the TNA had to face a lot of odds, and we also know that the government spent a lot of money on economic development in the north and the east. So it is very clear that investment in economic development alone does not solve minority problems. That has been the demonstrable result in a number of developed countries. It's not just a question of having a full stomach and a full purse. It's a question of your identity as a separate ethnic group, where you want to be treated with respect and where you want a certain amount of self-government, where you want a certain amount of devolution of power. It can range from federalism to something much less, but something has to be done. And we haven't done it for 2 years. Now a number of excuses are being made by the sophisticated apologists of the government to say that 12 years after the American Civil War nothing was done, and so on and so forth. But we are in the 21st century today. We are not in the 19th century when the American Civil War took place. And surely we can fast forward things, particularly when we have recovered from 3 decades of a civil war which has torn the country apart and which has left so much debris in terms of human losses as well as material losses. We need to therefore expedite a political solution.
On the question of whether the general public understand the impact of bribery and corruption, he had this to say.
Every country has a point of no return. I don't think you can prescribe for Sri Lankans the point which the Egyptians reached when they went on to Tahrir Square and demonstrated, or where that man in Tunis was so driven to desperation that he self-immolated in order to bring a point home, and that electrified his fellow citizens into what they did in Tunisia. Each country has to take its own path, and I think if the level of corruption in Sri Lanka and the level of authoritarianism continues, very much further, there will be a time when our people will say enough is enough. And we don't know when that time will be. I hope we don't resort to outside extra parliamentary means. I believe very strongly in democratic procedures, and I think democratic procedures have changed governments in the past. But we have, in the case of the JVP of 1971, 88, 89, and more recently the LTTE, we have rejected that form of social change and economic changes. So we need to have a way in which we can channel the protests and the disappointment of the people in a democratic manner to achieve change.
We asked Mr. Dhanapala if the private sector was strong enough to take a stand against bribery and corruption.
If some of the captains of industry, these people who are voted by the Lanka Monthly Digest as being the most respected in business, and others who are from time to time awarded various prizes for good business ethics, if these people come out openly and say, we want to have a clean business sector, and we ask that any tender being offered for a major construction effort should be done in such a way that we can accept these conditions in the interests of the country and in the interests of the taxpayer. If that is done and the others respond, then we will know that there is unity. If people don't respond, we know who the culprits are.
We take another break now. On the other side, we have the concluding part of this Best of Bench special.